All right, and welcome back again to the Paisan Sports podcast presented by Elevation 5280 Sports for a very special episode. The Eagles have just won the freaking Super Bowl for the first time in 7 years. For the first time in the history of this podcast, we are coming to you with an episode after one of our teams has won it all. So that feels pretty cool, especially after having to do a podcast after the Phillies lost it all in 2022 and after the Eagles lost it all in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Now we get to come at
And
you.
the Union lost. The Union
And the
lost. Don't
Union
forget
and
the
the
most important
Philadelphia
team.
Stars, the
Yeah,
Philadelphia
don't
Stars as
forget the
well. Do
most
not
important
forget
two
them.
teams in the city.
And I think our lacrosse team also lost. But yeah, so we're coming to you now as as champions, which is awesome. To continue my intro, Dante DePlacido, joined as always by Zach Deal of What's the Deal Sports. And listen, there is no What's the Deal this week, okay? The original idea behind the What's the Deal segment, when I first came up with it, was to complain about whatever was going wrong in the realm of Philly sports that week. So on a week where the Eagles are Super Bowl champions, it would just feel wrong to even try and come up with a what's the deal. But with that being said, I'm getting right into my meatball of the week. Right out the gate. I'm going meatball of the week. And I got a lot of meatballs. I got a lot of meatballs.
You got a
Okay.
full crock pot over
I
there?
got I got a crock pot full of meatballs. I got a pot full of meatballs. My first meatball. Okay. Nick Wright. Okay. Just wrong about everything all year. Wrong about Jalen Hurts. Wrong about Syria. Wrong about everything. Nick Wright, you're my first meatball of the week. My second meatball of the week is Chris. What the hell is that guy's name? I'm blanking on it. Colin
Chris Ho.
Cowherd. Colin Cowherd. Okay, Colin Cowherd said going into the Super Bowl, he didn't think the Eagles would be able to get into the red zone all game. Well, guess what? The Chiefs didn't get into the red zone until garbage time. All right, you're my second meatball of the week. My third meatball of the week is Pat Mahomes. Okay, Pat Mahomes. I didn't realize how cocky this motherfucker was up until after the Super Bowl. I'm seeing clips of him having a GQ interview with his wife, Brittany, another meatball of the week, where he asked, "What do I lose at?" She said, "You don't lose at anything." He goes, "You're right. I never lose. You just lost on Sunday, bitch. You're another meatball of the week." Okay. Who else do I got? Steve Spagnuolo. That's my final meatball of the week. Steve Spagnuolo, he's my meatball of the week because he spent his entire game planning to just stop Saquon Barkley because his dumbass bought in to the entire narrative all season. People saying, "Oh, all you gotta do is take Saquon out of the equation and let Jalen Hurts beat you with his arm," and he bought into that nonsense and he left it up to Jalen to beat him with his arm. And guess what? Jalen did beat him with his arm. And even after he had done that for a few certain plays, you look back after the fourth down stop. He still sold out to stop the run, and Jalen Hurts hit him over the top to Devontae Smith for a touchdown to put the game away, essentially. So those are my 5 meatballs of the week.
Yeah, that was a little aggressive. I thought, Patrick
No, I'm
Mahomes.
fired up, baby. I'm fired up. Go
Yeah, I
Birds.
thought Patrick Mahomes. I didn't think it was his fault on Sunday what transpired.
You didn't catch what I said. The point was Pat Mahomes just too cocky of an individual. Okay, he needed to be
Well, that's you
humble,
didn't
and
allow
on
me to
Sunday he
elaborate
got
on it. Like
humbled.
you didn't let me to elaborate. Like you're picking one clip of him. I'm not trying to defend him, but also all the clips that I've seen about Patrick Mahomes talking about Jalen Hurts, he was giving Jalen Hurts praise and talking about how underrated
Yeah,
he is and how people like the narrative about him doesn't make sense to him. So I don't know where the
but
cockiness.
I think you're giving him too much credit. You know what I mean? That's
I
that
think you're just
when
being a little too
you
harsh
can
on him.
still say all that while you have a superiority complex. You know what I mean? If you're rocking with a superiority complex, you can feel comfortable giving a guy who you think is inferior to you their flowers because you're not actually worried about the threat of
That's
them.
psychoanalyzing that, but
No. Look. He can say, listen. Pat Mahomes is media trained, so of course he's going to say positive things about Jalen Hurts. Pat Mahomes is a professional guy. He's not going to rip him going into the Super Bowl. Of course, he's going to say positive things about him. But when you actually look at the tape outside of him with the media all over him leading into a Super Bowl, when he knows people are going to be watching what he's saying, of course he's going to say positive things. But if you look at him in the light outside of that, you can tell he's a cocky individual. You can tell from the mic'd up footage that was released last night, his pregame speech. I mean, you look at Lane Johnson firing up the team, and you look at Pat Mahomes just rushing through his pregame speech and then just start walking out the tunnel before the team can even do a 2, 3, chant, whatever. You know what I mean? To me, he's a very cocky individual. I also look back at the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Before they threw the flag on James Bradbury for holding, Pat Mahomes got up and went, holding, that was holding, that was holding. And they threw the flag. This is a guy who, in my opinion, expects to have things essentially handed to him. And he just expects to win. Like, he doesn't feel, he just anticipates winning without actually, I don't know. I'm
I
struggling to
don't know.
find a
I
word
think you're
right now.
just I'm letting you go off on a tangent here, but you're kind of just
You know
spinning
what
some
I think
tires.
it is? I think here's the thing. Here's the thing. We have a lot of fights on this podcast where if somebody who has one hell of a career resume is one extremely talented individual, and I give them any form of criticism at all, you immediately jump to defend them. That's
No, because
that's
you're
why I'm
not.
not surprised that you're defending Pat Mahomes here when I'm saying he's a very cocky individual.
Well, I mean, you went on a tangent. I gave you the one example of why I just didn't think it. He's cocky. He has a reason to be cocky, and all high level athletes are cocky. I mean, I thought somebody that not your meatball of the week, but I thought something that we would touch on. Maybe not right off the bat, but sneak it in there. But since we got off to the start that you started the podcast the way that it is, what did you think about AJ Brown's interesting Instagram post? Let me read it word for word. A
Yeah,
few
go ahead.
days after the Super Bowl. Have you seen this post yet?
Yeah, I've
Okay.
heard it.
Let's read it word for word. After a few days, I've had time to reflect on being a champion. I tried to feel how everybody made it seem to be a champion, and unfortunately, it was short lived. 2 days to be exact, lol. I never been a champion at the highest level before, but I thought my hard work would be justified by winning it all. It wasn't. My thrill for this game comes when I dominate. It's the hunt that does it for me. It's when the DB drops his head and surrender because he can't F with me. The intense battles, early mornings, late nights, sacrifices. I love putting smiles on people's faces, don't get me wrong, but it just wasn't what I thought it would be. It's the journey that I love the most, back to work. Do you see anything wrong with AJ Brown posting that? Do you think that's necessary to post? What is your reaction when you first saw that post?
Well, my reaction when I first heard about it was I was listening to WIP and they were talking about it and they were saying, "Oh, I don't know if AJ Brown should be making these comments, blah 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 blah." So my first reaction was, "Why are we talking about this right now? Who cares? We just won the goddamn Super Bowl, and we're already back to finding ways to act like there's drama and whatnot. We did this all year. We did this." Last year and such with, like, oh, turmoil between Hurts and AJ Brown. And although this isn't exactly that, it's just an example. And now we've won the Super Bowl. And before we can even celebrate the parade, we're picking apart AJ Brown's post on Instagram. Listen, we just won a Super Bowl. Let him say whatever he wants to say. He just helped bring a trophy to the city.
Yeah, I didn't think pay too much attention to it. I was actually listening to WIP later on in the day, and they were talking about it, mixed it in for a little bit, and I know like the what was it, the the midday show, I think it is, like the 10 to 2 slot with Hugh Douglas and Joe Giglio. They were kind of getting on them a little bit, but that's their normal tendency to do out of all the shows. But I saw the post before they started talking about it on the radio. I read the entire thing because I saw it was a long caption and I didn't really the reason why, as a player, I could see why some people would try and nitpick it and analyze it down to the T and get a little upset with it. But for me, I actually, not having played in the game, just being a lifelong Eagles fan, I actually felt the exact same way. That and understand what AJ's talking about, but I could see why people had a little bit of distaste from that post, and I don't know if it was necessary for AJ. But the one thing about AJ, is he's, I don't know if controversial would be the correct word, but he does like bringing things to light that maybe the normal person wouldn't bring to light, and usually seems like he gets over things after he airs it out like that. So, but I see where he's coming from, because honestly, this Super Bowl felt a lot different than the Super Bowl victory from 52, and even the loss from 57. There was just a lot of different emotions that I was feeling from this game. So I don't this whole podcast too, I felt like the last podcast leading up to the Super Bowl 59, we did a lot of comparisons between the 2017 Super Bowl team and the Super Bowl 57 team that wasn't able to win the Super Bowl. I don't want to do that this entire podcast, but I just want to take this time, for this being the second championship in 7 years, and the second championship that I've witnessed not only in my 20s, but as an Eagles fan, with all the hardship throughout my childhood of trying to get over the hump and just beating the coach that used to be the coach my entire childhood that just couldn't get over the hump. So I just wanted to take the time at the beginning to talk about how this felt a lot different than Super Bowl 52, because Super Bowl 52 carried the weight of like 50 plus seasons, you know what I mean, on its shoulders, of not winning the championship since 1960, not winning a Super Bowl under the Super Bowl era that started in 1966. My mom was actually born in 1966, so she was born into the Super Bowl era. So that's always the easiest way for me to keep track of the year that the Super Bowl era started. I think it was the 1966 season, then was played in 67. So, and one thing real quickly, when we refer to the championship teams, it's 2017 and 2024. I hate
Yeah.
when people say 2018 and
You know
2025.
what I
The
hate
year
even
that,
more than
and
that?
the Super Bowl 2005 is my least favorite thing, because I like, that's how I remember Super Bowl 2004, the 2004 team. Then everybody says, "Oh, well, it was played in 2005. That's the team." No, it's literally the team was played, the entire season almost was played in 2017 or
What
2020.
what I hate even more than that is when people like refer to it as the 2017 to 2018 season. No, it's just the 2017 season. That
Yeah.
only works in the NBA
That's
when
the
they play
NBA,
it
where
that.
like literally half the season is split into
Yeah.
those. That's why I
Yeah.
like MLB, how MLB is just 1 year. So you know what I mean? It's just that year. So there's no confusion at all or anything. But getting back to what I was talking about with the differences between the two Super Bowl victories, 52 carried the weight of 50 plus seasons of never being able to get over the hump, seeing other teams inside the division have a lot of success. I know they realigned the divisions in the 1990s, so it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty much the same baseline that it's been forever, and they've added expansion teams and everything, but the NFC East has pretty much been intact with the same teams forever. So seeing the success of all the other teams in the division, especially through the 80s and the 90s, and then the Eagles never being able to get over the hump, and then the Giants in 2007 and 2011 when we went to all those NFC championships. So there was so much building up into that moment that it just felt like so much frustration was let out. We also had we were the underdogs. We were playing into the role, even though we were the number one seed. No one expected in year two of Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson for the team to be that good. When you look back on the team on paper and you say them as Super Bowl champions, you would actually kind of be a little bit shocked that a team with that roster on paper would be able to win the championship, especially with all the injuries that they overcame. So it just felt a lot of different. But even though this year, there is a different cast of characters. They had to rebuild this team to get to where it was. The defense almost needed like an entire retooling. There's a lot of difference, even though the same core is intact from the Super Bowl 57 loss. There's a lot of new faces with that. But this season also carried a lot of weight from 2022's loss and it being a rematch in the Super Bowl to the Chiefs, and the way that 2023 ended with the absolute collapse. So there was a lot of differences, and the way that I felt going into each game and the way that I felt after winning both of these Super Bowls. But I felt like Super Bowl 59, I wasn't I was really happy, and it wasn't anything about me not being happy in the scenario, but it wasn't like the same, just outburst of emotion and frustration and like almost not being able to control my emotions like it was for Super Bowl 52. This one, I was like so confident. I really didn't even think about, a loss being a possibility, even though you're playing against one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And I'm so amped up and happy, but I'm just looking into the future with how young this team is. I'm trying to parlay this into another victory. I remember when we won Super Bowl 52, it was never crossed my mind. I don't even remember. I don't think I ever crossed my mind at any point in time, like, oh, this team's going to go back to the Super Bowl next year and win it. I just thought we kind of, hit lightning in a bottle, and wasn't really thinking about the future and just living in this time. And the infamous everybody talking about how they didn't care if this team lost for the next 10 years after the Super Bowl. And we saw how quickly those feelings and emotions flared out with the frustration after the Carson Wentz era that happened after that Super Bowl victory. So just wanted to point out those differences.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you in the sense of a lot of things. There's definitely, to me, it felt a lot different than Super Bowl 52. Like when we won 52, it was great because, to your point, we had finally won a Super Bowl. We had waited years and years, and finally we had won a Super Bowl, and a massive weight had been lifted. And that's why it felt great. It also felt great because of the whole underdog story. But what felt a lot different about this one is, and what felt different about this one is, this one wasn't about finally getting over the hump. This one wasn't about proving ourselves as underdogs. This was about finally silencing the doubters as well as getting revenge. You know what I mean? Like 57 was such a heartbreaker, especially with the holding call at the end. I feel like the players as well as the fans were itching and clawing to get back and seek revenge. Um and so that was a huge part of it. And in terms of silencing the doubters, we've been hearing ever since Jalen Hurts has been a starting quarterback in this league, so much crap on him. People saying, he can't throw. That was the narrative for a while. This year it was, well, he's only playing well because he has a super team, and he'll never be able to win it all. And with Nick Sirianni, it's like every freaking week, if things go slightly wrong, even if the Eagles win, it's like, oh, is Sirianni going to be fired? Is Sirianni going to be fired? People calling him an idiot, etc. Saying he's too emotional. He's yelling at his own
ESPN's top
fans.
NFL reporter, like, writing a story about how he has the potential of being fired after the first playoff game if he ends up losing with the
Yeah,
rebound from the season,
it's
and they only go
ridiculous.
they only end
And
up 14-0 with Jalen Hurts starting, and they were also another interesting stat: 15-0 with Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown both starting together this season.
yeah, but people just always ignored that sort of stuff. They acted like we couldn't get it done. Um, and you might say, well, that sounds like you guys are underdogs, which is the English way. It's oddly different. It's hard to explain, but the Eagles were underdogs in 2017 because they were playing with a backup quarterback, so people didn't think we could get it done, and so it was kind of like a miracle run once the playoffs started. Not going into the playoff, not throughout the season because they had an extremely talented roster that year. But once the playoffs started, and we were underdogs by like a minimum of 4 points every game with our backup QB, it was kind of like a miracle run. But this was more so years of people doubting our head coach and our quarterback. And so to watch them finally shut everybody up, it was just so satisfying in a way I can't even really explain. And even outside of Sirianni and Hurts, you know what I mean, for Saquon Barkley to finally leave his toxic relationship in New York and immediately become the best running back in the league and win the Super Bowl was phenomenal. It was and we to just stomp them was so satisfying because it was just like I said going into the Super Bowl, like I didn't fully say what I want to say because I just get worried about jinxing them. But I said going into the Super Bowl, basically something along the lines of, all year going into games, people, have us pick to lose. We end up just, winning comfortably. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that in the Super Bowl. What I really wanted to say was typically when people doubt us, we end up really showing, they're idiots for that, and we really steamroll the other team to victory. And part of me thinks once we get into the Super Bowl, we're going to do that again to the Chiefs to really make a statement. That's what I really wanted to say, but I didn't want to jinx them. And that's kind of what happened. It was just so satisfying. It's like not only did we win, but like we showed, no, we really are that team. The
Yeah, and
Chiefs.
that's what I kind of talked about. I thought like I was giving the Chiefs their respect. I didn't think they were going to come out as flat as they did and unprepared as they looked with Andy Reid. That was probably the most unprepared Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes football team that I've ever seen before, and a lot of that credit goes to the Eagles. And I feel like they're just the Chiefs kind of just flared out and they got tired. I mean, it's tough when you're trying to three-peat and you play extra games every single season, and you really haven't updated the roster too much since you've gotten to that point. So I think they just went out flat a little bit. But I said going into the game, as much respect I was giving it to the Chiefs and everything, I thought there was a path to the Eagles making this game look like how the Bucks made Patrick Mahomes look like in 2020, and it ended up playing out that
This
way. I was
was
talking
this
about the
was even
pressure.
worse than that. This was
Yeah,
even
this
worse than
was.
that. You know what I mean? Like, the Chiefs were missing most of their offensive line in that game. The Bucks were blitzing them a ton, and still they didn't have the same.
Well,
They didn't have
what did I say
nearly
to
the
you?
same
You said
pressure
for
rate.
some reason you got upset when I brought up Joe Tooney, and I was just giving him his respect. But I also said, you said, why is that relevant for you to talk about? And I said they moved Joe Tooney from the inside to left tackle, and you said, why is that even relevant to talk about? And I said because I might have a factor in the game. And him trying to set the point of attack in pass protection, he was getting absolutely blown up off the edge. It wasn't just interior pressure; they were collapsing the pocket, but they were collapsing the pocket from the edges too. And in the Super Bowl, the first Super Bowl they won in 52 versus Tom Brady, they pretty much made one play. I mean, outside of Tom Brady beating himself, not catching that ball on fourth down, and they um, ended up making the strip sack late in the game that ended up being the one play, but he threw for over 500 yards passing. They had a historic pass rush in 2022 at 70 sacks in the regular season plus, and 4 guys with 10 plus sacks, and didn't touch Patrick Mahomes once in the game.
Well, that
And
was a
in this
slippery ass field.
yeah,
Um,
and in
but
this game, they actually got after Patrick Mahomes, and that was the biggest thing. And the biggest
they
thing
didn't
going
blitz
into the
once.
season,
They didn't even blitz once.
they didn't
And
blitz one time. And going into the season, the biggest thing that I said was this team doesn't have an identity like it had when it made it to the Super Bowl a few years back, with it being the pass rush. And they moved on from a couple guys. They brought in some guys that were a little bit questionable. They moved on from their best pass rusher in the offseason, and they anointed a first round pick, a role that people didn't think he was ready for. And you saw as the season went on, the young guys only got better. So that was just the most impressive part about the entire thing. But what I found interesting real quickly, even though it's just kind of a side note that doesn't really make too much sense, but I found it interesting. So the Eagles scored 22 points versus the Packers in the first playoff game. They allowed 22 points versus the Rams in the second playoff game. They allowed 23 points to the Commanders in the NFC Championship. And then the Chiefs scored 22 points in the Super Bowl. So 3 out of the 4 games in the playoffs that the Eagles played, one of the teams ended up scoring exactly 22 points, and the other one was 23. I just thought that was like randomly interesting. But yeah, that was just a random side note to throw in there.
yeah, interesting. The one thing I really want to say about this game and about the Chiefs is I feel like they were so focused on the idea of the three-peat, that they kind of looked past us. they kind of look past us. They look past the game. I feel like to me, like the vibe I get from the Chiefs is to them the game was just a formality to their glorious three-peat. They just had to go out there, play their usual game, get the three-peat, and
You
get
know what's
all the
interesting about
glory
that
and
though?
fanfare.
You know
What's
what's
that?
interesting about that though is how I made the comparison talking about the different Super Bowls and how the feeling was, but how this Super Bowl carried the weight of two different seasons with losing to the Chiefs that started the three-peat potential for them, and then the way they collapsed in 2023, talking about the Eagles. The Chiefs were carrying that weight as well, and probably even more with the three-peat
Well,
potential being
one
on the
thing,
board.
the other thing I want to say, last week on the podcast, I said I think the pressure of three-peating might be on the weight of the Chiefs' shoulders. I was dead wrong. I was dead wrong. From what I feel like I was dead wrong. I feel like they didn't feel any pressure. They were just so lackadaisical, and they just thought,
I feel like it's more about the journey that it took them to get back to another Super Bowl that really just drained them. It's like the LeBron playing in like 10 straight
I
finals, and
don't
it's
know
like
about that, man. I don't know about that. It just seemed like they were able to coast their way back. They of course they had a lot of close games and stuff, but
I
each
wouldn't say
time it was like a
coaster game.
controversial call or devil magic or whatever. And then once they got to the playoffs, they actually performed really well in the playoffs. And I think they just looked at the Eagles as just any other opponent. Uh, it kind of like forgetting that, 2 years ago, the Eagles walked out of that stadium a different team. I mean, Jalen Hurts said it during the mic'd up footage, that Super Bowl 57 loss changed his soul.
Yeah, I
And you
had
could
that
just
written down with Grant Calcaterra on the sidelines when they were talking on the bench, and it said it changed his soul. He's not going to celebrate. He asked him if he was going to crack a smile, and that's what he responded with, and said that not until it's over. So yeah, that definitely
yeah,
changed
and
his soul.
and
Everybody
it's like
knows about the infamous screensaver that he has on his phone too, and they asked him if he was going to change that after the Super Bowl victory, and he said he's in no rush to do that. So.
yeah, like this was a team that was absolutely fired up, and they were going to accept nothing less than victory.
I
You
know,
know,
but I really don't think we don't have to look too far into it, and, it's not rocket science. Like, the Chiefs beat the Bills. Like, the Bills were a good team, especially for the AFC. They have a great quarterback, but, I mean, the Eagles would have smashed the Bills, like, even worse than what they did the Chiefs. The Bills
yeah, and
aren't
that's
that
and that's
good,
my
and
thing.
none
I
of the
don't think the
rosters in the
Chiefs
NFL.
realized how good of an Eagles roster this was, because to the point I was about to get to is, like Lane Johnson in the tunnel with everybody, he said, you know, there's motherfuckers that are humble and motherfuckers that are about to be, right? And then meanwhile, you just had Pat Mahomes just like giving like a very generic speech of like, oh, have your guys back and execute plays and blah blah blah. And they just did not seem like a team that was fired up, even on the sidelines. And like just for an example, I recently saw the mic'd up footage from Super Bowl 56. I mean, not Super Bowl 56, 51, when Tom Brady was down 28-3, and he was on the sidelines fired up and really talking to his team and getting them all fired up, and like he was not going to accept defeat, and he was going to crawl his way back into that game. And then you look at the Chiefs on the sidelines, and they're like, you know what? Tom Brady came back down 28-3. We can do this too. But they just didn't seem fired up. Like they didn't seem like they really, really wanted. Like you can't just look at another team coming back down from that deficit. You have to actually lock in and make it happen. And I don't know. To me, it just seemed like they just thought they'd be able to just go out there and win because that's what they'd been doing all season, and they just completely underestimated the Eagles, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think everybody underestimated the Eagles, and I think the Eagles were by far the most talented roster in the NFL, and it just
Yeah,
came to fruition. And maybe if the Lions had a healthy roster, I still think the Eagles are significantly better as a team. They just have so much more depth, and the defense is significantly like light years better than what the Lions put out on the field. That's why I think the Eagles would smack them. But you could argue at full strength with no injuries, like maybe the three best rosters and teams in the entire league are, the 49ers, the Lions, and the Eagles. So the toughest route might have came through the NFC. And obviously the 49ers went down with injuries and just couldn't get it together this year. And the Lions flared out after having a really good regular season. But the whole year, everybody talking about the Lions being the best team, this, that, the other. I never believed that. I always wanted the Eagles' opportunity to get a crack at them. And even Amon-Ra St. Brown talking about how he wants that to be the opening game of the season next season and talking
He
about
should be. He should. You know what? I got two more meatballs this
yeah,
week.
but don't cut me off.
Amon-Ra St. Brown and Dak Prescott. Get back to what you were saying.
Yeah, but he's saying how we'll see how this shit operates with a fully healthy defense and everything. But I mean, the Eagles just proved like they could win games in every type of fashion this season. And I mean, for a team that's offense was slow and they're not producing points and everything, they scored 95 points in the last 2 games of the season. They put up the most points in conference championship history. They've won both Super Bowls now, putting up 40 plus points. I don't know if anybody really thought about that. That was actually one of my initial thoughts. It's like, wow, we dropped 40 in another Super Bowl and won.
Yeah,
And
and in the Super Bowl we
and if
lost,
they
we
would
put
have,
up 30 plus.
that's what I'm saying. If they would have came back and beat the Chiefs in the last Super Bowl, they would have probably ended up having to put up 42.
Yeah, if it
So,
wasn't for that freaking holding call.
but
Um,
but what do you think the number one thing that got this team to actually win another Super Bowl, moving on from 2017's team, and how that team just didn't have the longevity and the core and the same guys, and just like how young this unit is now that just won the Super Bowl. It took a lot to get back there. What do you think the number one most pivotal thing was the difference to get this team rebuilt to being back? Not even rebuilding from 2022 to 2024, but like in that 7-year stretch. What do you think the most pivotal move or pairing or addition was to get this team back to the Super Bowl and actually win it? Not just to get to the Super Bowl, but win it. What do you
I
think the
think it
biggest
was.
thing was?
I think it was a few things, and all of it relates to Howie, obviously. I think it was the Carson Wentz trade because they were able to, flip, a
But
lot of
even
the.
more specific than that, like one potential player that they brought in that
Well,
just
hold on.
double trade.
Hold on. To me, it's not as simple as specific as that. I think it's the Wentz trade where they were able to flip that into a ton of different players. I think a huge role that played in it was Howie drafting Arcega-Whiteside and Jalen Reagor. I think that played a huge role into it, in my opinion, because those draft picks were the wake up call that Howie needed. Like when we won the Super Bowl in 2017, a lot of the key players were from great trades or signings that Howie made. But even back then, Howie didn't have the best track record with drafting outside of picks he had made in like the top 10. He was always good at that because those were more layups, like Lane Johnson and Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox. But outside of that, he always had done poorly in the first round with guys like Marcus Smith, etc. But and then he kind of kept up with his poor drafting, and just the Jalen Reagor pick especially was such a wake up call because he went away from trying to overthink after that, and he just started taking the best players from the best schools. The Devontae Smith.
He did it arguably the next pick in that
Yeah,
draft.
yeah, yeah, and then following that, and that was also the Milton Williams draft. But he had always drafted well in the late rounds, though. But ever since then, I mean, he's taking guys like Devontae Smith and Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter and
Well,
Jordan
you just
Davis
brought it
and
up right
David
there.
Bean.
That's what the true turning point for the Eagles over that time span to me is the additions of 2 players and just the core that just set the values of this team. And I think the additions of Devontae Smith, adding him in the draft, even giving up the potential to draft a player like Micah Parsons and trading with your arch nemesis to move up to grab him at pick 10, it was just such a no brainer. And to think that Jalen Waddle went before Devontae Smith, and people thought that Jalen Waddle, even a couple years into his career, was better than Devontae Smith is crazy. But just adding Devontae Smith and then A.J. Brown together and just setting the nucleus in a passing league, even with how great Saquon Barkley was this year, just like with the turmoil of not being able to have those receivers. We had 3 receivers with 8+ receiving touchdowns in 2017 with Carson Wentz during his historic season during that year with Alshon Jeffrey, Zach Ertz, and Nelson Aguilar. But since then, we couldn't get the wide receiver position right at all. And I think once we invested into that position and made the right moves, and it wasn't like we were being cheap either, and we're trying to hit on gems later on in the draft at that position. We targeted a Heisman Trophy winner that was a locked in, dead set, bona fide great player, and we got a young superstar at the right time for a team that had just went to pretty far in the playoffs as a number 1 seed in the Titans with him on the roster. So to me, the true turning point was investing in that position, and that was a position that the Eagles historically haven't really put too many resources in, and might have been a little bit scared to put resources into it, or what happened with Terrell Owens back in the day. But we had a Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson, but since Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson, we really hadn't had guys that we had brought in that were like a dynamic pairing together as a duo. So I think that really changed things. And Nick Sirianni being a wide receiver coach in the past, being a wide receiver himself, I just saw a highlight of Nick Sirianni scoring 3 touchdowns at Mount Union.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, so that was pretty classic, but I really think that was the true turning point. You could also look at a trade like the Darius Slay trade in 2019 and getting a guy at just the value of getting him at the age of 29 for a 3rd round pick, one of the best players at his position at the time. Because you could look at the identity has always been in the trenches, and some of the additions they made on the defensive line and bringing in Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter in one draft and moving up one selection to get Jalen Carter, and how all the talk was, oh, get Bijan Robinson. I was even a Bijan Robinson fan myself, but then if you draft Bijan, then you don't have Jalen Carter or Saquon Barkley. So it's all those little moves like that, and how you draft Jalen Reagor. And if they drafted Justin Jefferson instead, then they probably don't have AJ or Devontae. So you can all look at things like that. But the identity has always been in the trenches, and they have always had good offensive linemen. I mean, Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson were around forever, and then the other 3 revolving door positions that haven't been revolving doors, but just based off of those guys being there for that long, and then the way that they've been able to replenish
left tackle, left guard and right guard.
No, I'm just talking about. I'm talking about longevity.
It was JP for a long time, and now it's going to be Mailata for a long
I know.
time.
I'm not talking about a revolving door, but I'm talking about from the time period of Andy Reid leaving, those were the steady constants, and Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson, but they've always had success of bringing another guy in to match with that. So the offensive line has always been their identity, and that was one of the biggest reasons why they won the Super Bowl this year. But I think since they made that investment at the wide receiver position, everybody's we talked about, stop Saquon, and that's the only thing you could do. But you saw how deadly these 2 wide receivers are, and on the biggest stage, I mean, they both scored touchdowns, and just the safety blanket for Jalen Hurts to make all these plays as a passer and a quarterback. And it's outside of the one Jahan Dotson play, he was good for every couple games.
He had 2 good plays. He had 2 good plays.
To catch a 40-yard pass, 1 catch. He had 2 catches in the Super Bowl, but he had his classic stat line was every couple games he'd catch a 40-yard pass down the sidelines or something. And it was funny.
And it took us a while to even get to that point,
And the crazy part was when you watched them mic'd up, that play was strictly designed for Jahan Dotson. That was strictly a one-on-one shot to Jahan Dotson. So they felt comfortable about their matchups. They always will feel comfortable about their matchup with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside 1v1 versus pretty much anybody. I mean, especially Devontae Smith. At times, he was teammates with the Defensive Player of the Year in college of this season. You know what I mean? So that going against the Defensive Player of the Year every day in college is probably going to, sharpen your iron a little bit. But I think the true turning point for me is just investing in those wide receiver positions and finally getting that correct and getting the passing game evolved to the point where, they're this good to beat you on the ground or in the air.
Yeah, well, it was that, but also a very key thing that I hadn't mentioned as well. Well, that I kind of mentioned in a way is, going back-to-back corner in the 1st and 2nd round of this year's draft.
100%. That's
Um,
something they also did back in the day with Sheldon Brown and Lito
yeah,
Shepherd, and that
yeah.
panned out
Somebody
very
even
well
brought that
for
up
a
on
lot of success.
WIP. It's the first time in 22 years since 2002 that they went corner first and second round, and
And
that was
that's
huge
more
for
so
Chris
something that I point
Baker's
to.
team.
That's more so something that I point to them getting over the hump. But what set the foundation for them to even compete at a high level and make that first 57 Super Bowl was getting those two
Yeah,
wide receivers as
yeah, I
dynamic as
agree
they
with
were.
that. I agree with that definitely. Um, one shout out I want to make to a guy who, you know what, like he got a lot of hate last year, and even going into this year and everything, and the guy who, in my opinion, shouldn't even be on the roster. But we've talked about this a few times on this podcast. Mainly, you have brought it up. James Bradbury, how he was able to, switch to safety without really complaining, comes back from injury, but he's not put anywhere near, the active roster. And he never complained once. And, reports came out of him like, helping out with the young guys and whatnot and mentoring and giving them advice and just, not really being problematic in any way after, losing a starting role and being a guy on a big contract. That's James Bradbury. Like, in my opinion, like a quiet, unsung hero of this team, just for just being like not problematic at all and just helping his team in any
That was
way
a
he
couple.
could.
There's a couple guys like that. You can put Avonte Maddox in that category too, being the
Well,
starting.
Avonte Maddox, he actually made a huge play. I
I
that was
know,
the
but I'm
last
just
thing I
saying,
saw coming.
just
That was the
taking
last
another
thing I
guy.
saw coming.
He was a guy that another guy that they they cut him and then brought him back, and he was the starting nickel for a very long time. He's really close friends with Dallas Goedert. Um, and with Avonte Maddox, I mean, he was the starting nickel for a long time, and they got a young guy that they wanted to get implemented. And you saw the change in this defense once they implemented Cooper DeJean into the lineup. But he still got his opportunity on the biggest stage and made the fourth down pass breakup on Patrick Mahomes, which was crazy. And he's another guy that, had to just sit back and accept that he wasn't going to play a big role on a championship team anymore. But if he still wanted to be a part of the team, then he needed to do what it took. And he got his opportunity to make a play, and he made one. So I finally saw Um, James Bradbury make an appearance on social media again with this Lombardi trophy. So that was
Mhm.
interesting. That was cool to see. I just saw today that he said that he wants another opportunity to show what he can do, whether it's at safety or
Y
corner. I don't
Yeah,
think
that's
that's
not
going to be
gonna
with
happen.
the
That's not
Eagles. I
gonna
think
happen.
that's going to be one of the first things they look to do is get rid of potentially the Bryce Huff contract and the James
And the
Bradbury
Bradbury
contract.
contract. Yeah, I did wanna
But
touch on.
but also real quickly, just on the impact that the veteran DBs are making, Quinyon Mitchell was asked who the best defensive back of all time was, and he said Darius Slay. So that just
Oh, I
shows
didn't
what
hear
the
that.
veterans and the impact. And even there was Cooper Jean was even talking about the impact that Avonte Maddox helped in him learning the slot position. So I mean, they're all everybody was in it to win it. There wasn't really anybody outside of how you interpret AJ Brown's comments at times. There wasn't really anybody that was playing a selfish role or a singular role and talking about how or creating any decisive or divisiveness throughout this team. So um, it's just crazy that they were able to get it done once again, and they're this young and looking to get right back there. But it's also surreal that some of the things played out. If you listen to the radio leading up to the week, everybody's uncle, 60-year-old Delco resident, was calling in talking about how Cooper DeJean's going to get a pick six in the Super Bowl just because they wanted to see it happen. And I kind of dismissed it, like even having a chance to happen, just as much as I wanted. I'm like one of the biggest Cooper DeJean fans there is. I wanted him to be the first round pick. If you go back and we pull up the podcast
Yeah, well,
clips,
we both did, and a lot of
and
people did.
we ended
Nobody
up getting
even
him in the
thought he
second
would
round.
slip to
But
the
to
second
see him,
round.
like, to talk about, like, in February, like this time last year, and maybe a little bit like 11 months ago, talk about how, yeah, I want the Eagles to draft Cooper DeJean in the first round, and then to see him on the biggest stage make that play. I probably watched that play on Twitter 250 times since it's
I've
happened.
watched it a million times.
Uh,
I don't know if you've seen the British commentators.
I watched it in every language. Yeah.
Yeah, the British commentators version was great, and also people annoy me when it comes to that because people are commenting, oh, literally every language is better than the American version. No, no, like yeah, there were some versions like the British version where it was better than Kevin Burkhardt, but no, the Australian version sounded weak in my opinion, and you don't even know what they're saying in all the other languages. So just shut up. People just say stuff like that by default. But yeah, I mean, another guy I'm extremely happy for is Cooper DeJean, especially I was watching the footage of him on the second draft night earlier today, where he was a little disappointed he didn't go in the first round,
He was getting
and then
prank called by people too.
yeah, and then when
So
he
he didn't
got the
answer. He
call
didn't
that he
answer
was
the
going
Eagles'
to
initial
Philly,
call.
yeah, but then when he did answer the call and he got the word he was going to Philly, I mean, just like how happy he was visually and his family around him, it was
A
just
dude
awesome
from
to
a
see.
dude from a community in Iowa with less than 1,000 people, a population of less than 1,000
Yeah,
people. Like, that's the epitome of a
he
small
made the biggest
small thing.
play. He made the biggest play in the Super Bowl. But before we move on a bit,
Is that
you know,
real quickly, where do you rank that play all time in Eagles history? That's a top 5 play all
I
time.
was
Where would you rank
actually
it
talking
specifically, though?
to I was actually talking to my cousin about this over the phone. About the top plays in Eagles playoff history, and you got to go with the BG strip sack, the Philly special. You got to go with 4th and 26. But
Miracle at the Meadowlands, maybe? Like, just kinda all of them, like, mixed in there?
what play at the Meadowlands?
The Miracle at the Meadowlands, you can go Deshaun
That
Jackson
wasn't
punt
no. I'm
return.
talking about in the playoffs. I'm talking about in the
Oh,
playoffs.
playoffs wise,
Yeah,
trying to
so you would go with those two plays from 52. You got to go with the 4th and 26. Um, but and then the Cooper DeJean pick six is right up there with them. Um, just
I would probably, you know, probably the 78-yard Saquon second touchdown in the Rams game is probably up there too. A
yeah,
lot of
that's
people have,
probably up there as
a
well.
lot of people put a lot of, weight on the Jalen Carter sack of Matt Stafford too, which I think is a massive play too, as
Yeah, well,
well.
and also the strip sack on Pat Mahomes is up there
Oh my
already.
god, I can't believe he wasn't injured on that play. He got absolutely
He
murdered
got
on that play.
walloped too. Listen, Pat Mahomes, he needed that ass whooping. In my opinion, he needed to like actually physically get his ass whooped because his whole career it's been like you even breathe on him and that's a 15-yard penalty. And he went out there and he just had a D line that was just wreaking havoc at him all game, getting hit, getting put to the ground. And the one thing, like, my one thought about all of this is like, you know, Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, like to me, it seems like that was a team Pat Mahomes just viewed as like a stepping stone to his three-peat. And then we come back 2 years later and we beat that ass, right? But now I honestly feel like in Super Bowl 57 that changed Jalen Hurts. I think I think this Super Bowl is going to have an effect on Pat Mahomes, right? Because the first Super Bowl he lost, like I mentioned, he's without his offensive line. He's going up against the GOAT Tom Brady. He's already a one-time Super Bowl champion. And he loses that game. He's out there running for his life the entire time. He played his heart out in that game and he lost. It's like, what can you do? Right? But then you go out, you win two Super Bowls in a row. You're looking at a three-peat. You're eyeing up a three-peat. Your team is already in talks with Pat Riley about, getting permission to use the copyrighted term three-peat. That's all you have your eyes set on. And you look past the Eagle. Like I mentioned, to me, they viewed this game as just a formality. And then you just get sneak attacked like that. And you get put on your ass throughout an entire game and the whole world is kind of making you out to be the butt of the joke after that, making your team, your teammate Travis Kelsey, Taylor Swift, all of them out to be the butt of the joke. And I feel like Pat Mahomes is going to want to come back looking for revenge. And I do feel like this Eagles team is going to be right there waiting to put him right back down on his ass, in my opinion. Because
Yeah,
I
well, I
think
think as much as you're talking about Patrick Mahomes, I think he did not play good in the Super Bowl. This is one of the worst games he's ever played in his career, and some of his decision making, but a lot of it had to do with I just felt like his teammates. I'm not taking any blame off of Patrick Mahomes himself, but I felt like his teammates just didn't live up to
I I
anything.
think
I thought that
I
was the
think it was
worst
the
offensive line.
blocking scheme. I think it was the blocking scheme, if anything, that really screwed him. The left and right tackle, they
Well,
were
yeah, they were like
basically
trying to chip. They were trying to chip with Travis Kelce on like Josh Sweat at times, and he was the only one getting hands on them. And like I said, the difference in moving Joe Tooney, who's an interior guard, um, out to left tackle, that was actually a move that Patrick Mahomes felt comfortable with, but they just didn't have good tackles on the roster all season. I mean, if you looked at the first game of the season with the Ravens, how many times on both of those teams did they call that offensive tackle not lining up on the line of scrimmage because his helmet line wasn't on the belt line of the center? So they called that many times. They've had sloppy play. Jawan Taylor was atrocious. That's been a revolving door for them, and they haven't really been able to patch up that position because they've been drafting 31 or 32 every single season. So I actually think they just really need to retool and get things right. Their defense is still pretty good. Their defense was just put in so many bad situations, like you saw some of the
the
times in the
defense was
mic'd up.
so good, but they
Um,
just they only focused on stopping Saquon.
yeah, well, I mean that's obviously a big thing. I don't even think it's the only focus. That's just how good and dangerous the Eagles are. There's nothing you can actually focus on because they're just going to be able to beat you in a
They were
different way.
definitely more focused on stopping Saquon, and even one coach said it to him. They said like, and that was one thing I wanted to bring up on the podcast before they even said it on Mic'd Up. Is like a big reason, like Saquon, he only rushed for 2.3 yards per carry, but a big reason the Eagles offense was so successful is because they were so keyed in on stopping him that it opened up literally everything else. So even without Saquon having a good performance, just his presence of being there and just what he did all season, that really opened things up for the rest of the Eagles
Well,
offense.
I also think like, that I think they did put a lot of emphasis on stopping Saquon, but at the end of the day, outside of Trent McDuffie, their secondary, in my opinion, is just not that good at all. I think
Yeah,
Justin Reed's a pretty decent safety. They have Hicks, the second round safety that they got that they mix in. They use like three safeties at times, depending on the package they're using. What's his name? Brian Cook that caught the interception on like just a bad pass from Jalen. And speaking of pass, not picking up a pass protection well. Cam Jurgens was horrible in that play. He absolutely let
oh
Nick
my
Bolton
god, yeah, that
right
was
up the middle.
terrible.
He
That
literally
was
looked to the
that was
left.
like
And I
miscommunication.
don't want to hear people like explain that, oh, he's like the offensive line sliding to protect one way. If there's a blitzer in your hole, and regardless of which way you're looking, you need to pick him up because the other guard was not looking in that direction at all, and that just was caused the interception of the game.
Yeah,
And you
but
can see
he's a young guy,
I know, but
and
just real quickly, I felt the Eagles' offensive line is great, but at times the pass protection isn't as good as the offensive line actually
well,
is. They're
the
definitely a
thing,
lot better at run blockers than they are pass protectors. But real quickly, to just finish that Chiefs thought, the Chiefs, outside of that Brian Cook interception, I don't think Brian Cook's that good of a player at all. And they didn't even, it's like, I think he's like, a second or third round pick, but they just been, getting lucky. Trent McDuffie came from the Tyreek Hill trade. George Karlaftis is a good player too. He had like 3 or 4 sacks in the Texans game that I remember. But they just haven't had the high resources that they've had to like replenish the roster. And they kind of just thought like, we'll keep the roster as is. It's good enough to get over the hump. And it just wasn't the same that they thought it was. But I think their defense, like the matchup 1v1, I wasn't really worried about Saquon. I always felt confident in Jalen in this game because outside of Trent McDuffie, people were even saying Trent McDuffie was the best cornerback in the game leading up into the game, which I thought was crazy. He's
I
a
didn't hear
great
anybody
player.
say that.
Yeah, I
That's
think
just
he's a great
absurd.
player, but like if you look at the way the Eagles secondary has played and the resumes that they put
I
together, I
mean,
think
you
that's
can
pretty
make an
questionable.
argument for any three of the guys any three of the Eagles corners. You
Yeah, I
can make
think
a
Trent
legit
McDuffie is definitely a
argument for
top.
them.
He's a
Cooper
top 10
DeJean, the
corner, but
highest
like
rated
people.
corner in football, slay with the resume he has. But the one thing I not to circle back, but the one thing I did want to talk about with the Chiefs pass protection was what it really reminded me. It reminded me of one specific Eagles game from a long time ago, 2016, a game I was actually at. And I remember watching the mic'd up footage from that with Connor Barwin. The game against the Vikings when they just absolutely walloped Sam Bradford all game. I remember after Connor Barwin got a strip sack on Sam Bradford, he went back to the bench and was like, guys, listen, the tackles, they're basically doing punt protection the way they're blocking. It's basically pumper. They're just dropping back. You just got to rush at them and flail your arms at the quarterback. And the Chiefs' style of blocking for Pat Mahomes felt very similar. They were just, ball
Well,
snap. They were
that's the
backing
number one
up.
reason. Joe Tooney was literally, to me, it seemed like Joe Tooney was literally trying to pass protect like he was still in the interior and like as if he had help from the center. And like he would just set back to a deep point in the pocket, like right next to where Mahomes was dropping to, and not even get his hands on the defensive lineman because he couldn't quick enough and he didn't have the extension. And he would try and punch and he would be so close, like he would already be so set up so close to Patrick Mahomes that he would just get driven into him
Yeah,
every
and
time. And that's what was
that's how
doing.
the interception happened with Zach Bond because
Yeah,
Josh Sweat was able to just, I mean, in pretty much every snap, Sweat and the right tackle was doing the same thing as well. So,
yeah.
with Josh Sweat and Nolan Smith and Jalen Hunt all game, they were able to especially coming from just lined up in like a 2-point stance. They were able to just run straight at them, build up a good head of steam, and just shove them right into Mahomes. But that's especially what happened on the Zach Bond interception, where Josh Sweat just came running up, just shoved Tuner right into Mahomes, and it caused an errant throw for the interception. So that was, that was a huge aspect of the Eagles being so dominant in that game. And the one other thing I did want to bring up, I talked on this podcast before about how I felt the Eagles pass rush in 2017 was so different, even better than 2022, because it felt like consistently they were rush with a 4-man rush and the pressure would get there so quickly you would think they were blitzing. That is what we saw in the Super Bowl. That was exactly what I was referring to. They didn't blitz the entire time, but every time Mahomes dropped back, I mean, the pressure got there so quick, you would have thought they were blitzing. It was just a phenomenal defense performance from the D line,
They put
and
together the best 3-play sequence in Eagles history.
yeah,
Leading up to the Cooper
yeah,
DeJean interception, they
back
had
to
2
back
sacks
sacks
in a
and a pick
row.
six, man.
And a pick six, that was like the best sequence in Eagles
Yeah.
history. And just the way the defensive line performed, you would just have to think real quickly to touch on it. We're not going to touch too much on like the moves that they can make in the offseason. We'll celebrate the victory today on the podcast and talk about those things leading up until free agency and everything. But I think there's a good chance that their defensive line rotation looks different next season just because of how well 2 guys specifically played that are going to be up for contracts with the Eagles, and Milton Williams and Josh Sweat. And there's even talk about them each potentially getting over 20 million. Specifically, I've seen both getting rated at maybe 22 million plus per season, which just would not be in the Eagles range. But those guys played a big impact. Milton Williams being a former 3rd-round pick. I mean, I don't know if everybody's seen the viral video of Milton Williams being drafted and how he's celebrating, and then another high arcing member of the Eagles organization shaking his head like it was a horrible
Oh
pick.
yeah, the infamous fist bump video. Yeah.
Yeah, so that Josh Sweat was a guy. I love when Philadelphia doesn't overthink it and they trust guys for the profile that they had leading up. I think Nolan Smith was the 4th overall player coming out of his high school recruiting class from where did he go to high school? I think he went to IMG, which is just if you know high school football, IMG is like an absolute force academy, top 5 school to be produced from. But with Josh Sweat was like, I'm pretty sure was either the number 1 or number 2 overall player in his high school draft, 5-star defensive end. And his career at Florida State in college didn't go the way that many thought it would. And he didn't really progress too much, and people just didn't see too much in him. And the Eagles got another steal in him in the 4th round, and Milton Williams also being a 3rd rounder coming from SMU. But Tyrese Maxey was the same way with the Sixers being a 5-star recruit college guy, but they end up getting him outside the lottery. Even Keeley Ringo was like the 9th overall high school player from his high school recruiting class too. You can go down the line of different guys that they've had, but it looks like those two guys might end up actually leaving in free agency just with how well they played in the draft. I mean, Josh Sweat even said it himself. I don't know if people buy into it too much, but he said that he could have won MVP, but it's all good. I don't think that was really
And
a
that's
slight.
another thing taken out of context.
I don't
I
think that
think
was really a slight at Jalen at all. I mean,
no, I think he just felt like he had a great game and like he could have
I
potentially been the
specifically
Super
tweeted
Bowl
at
MVP.
halftime, Josh Sweat needs a new contract at halftime because of how well he was playing and just the way that he was bursting the pocket. And then Milton Williams had almost just as strong of a performance, laying the biggest hit I've ever seen laid on Patrick Mahomes and having another sack outside of that, causing the strip sack. And it just sucks because there's so many guys that have to get paid. Zach Bond, who had a pick in the Super Bowl from the Josh Sweat play, he's up for another contract. So just real quickly to touch on the players that are up for contract. Like I said, we're not going to dive into this, how the path to getting them back on the roster and all that stuff. But um, the Eagles free agents this offseason, Zach Bond, linebacker, Josh Sweat, defensive end, Milton Williams, defensive tackle, Brandon Graham, defensive end. So a lot of people are talking about Brandon Graham even coming back. He actually halted the retirement talk, saying that he's, he has to think it a little bit more through. So the path to Brandon Graham being on the roster next year is not only him wanting to return himself, but it's if the Eagles are going to be willing to have him return, and he would probably have to take a pay cut. So because Brandon Graham coming back, I don't think the Eagles are going to be able to pay him like over $5 million per year. They would probably give him a decent contract, more over his value, but I think they just don't have the resources now to give him like a big 1 year deal like they gave him in years past to return. Mekhi Becton as well, Fred Johnson, Avante Maddox, Rick Lovato, who's actually an all-time Eagle, being one of like 4 guys to ever win 2 titles with the Eagles, with Lane Johnson, Brandon Graham, and Jake Elliott. So he's an Eagles legend, low-key, long
Wait,
snapper.
real quick, while you're talking about that, just to take a quick victory lap. One prediction I had right. I thought, with how bad Jake Elliott was all season, it would be very fitting if he, played extremely well in the Super Bowl. And God damn it, I was right. That was easily the best performance from Jake Elliott all season. Not only did he make, I think it was 4 field goals, but he made 2 of them twice and then had to make them again from either further distance after the penalties. So shout out Jake Elliott.
I'm not even going to give him a pat on the back because that's what he should be doing. So I think he was just doing his job. So good job for doing your job. Everybody did their job on Sunday. So that's that. But I'm not going to give him extra credit for that because he's just doing what he's supposed to do.
Boo!
But Rick Lovato, Kenneth Gainwell, running back, Oren Burks, who played a huge role for the Eagles down the stretch, filling in a major piece that they lost in Nakobe Dean. So we'll see if they bring him back just as a depth piece. He's 29 years old. He'll be 30 by next season. But, Nakobe's going to be coming back from that injury, and they don't even know if they'll have Zach Bond. So maybe they just re-sign him for some depth. CJ Azuma, who didn't really play too much, was pretty much inactive. Jack Driscoll, Nick Gates, center. And Nick Gates was a party animal inside that locker room, too. He was actually one of like the biggest like reserve players that really didn't play a huge role in the team that actually was like really celebrating. And LaRaven Clark, one of the craziest names, LaRaven. But yeah, those are the guys that are free agents, so they're gonna have to figure out what they have to do. They also have to make moves on guys like James Bradbury and Bryce Huff and see what they want to do. Brandon Graham is one of the free agency. If he wants to come back, maybe tweak some rosters. They do contract restructures like they always do with Lane Johnson. So maybe they do that to some of the players. They have to, Josh Sweat leading into this season. So Josh Sweat leading into this season, took a restructure on his contract to even come back. So maybe that was the wrong move for Philadelphia. And with all the great things that Howie has done, he has made mistakes along the way. It's just all the impact of the correct moves that he's made have just far outweighed.
Yeah, I
the
mean, look
bad
at
moves.
Bryce Huff. That was Bryce Huff. That was definitely a mistake.
I just love bringing up just how the 2 highest paid players on defense just don't make an impact, and the Eagles still have the best
And
defense.
it really
Hilarious.
speaks volumes that they were able to win a Super Bowl while having so much money tied up in 2 guys that didn't even play. That just shows, like how
Bryce Huff
good the
was a
depth
healthy
signings
scratch
were,
in the
how
Super
good they
Bowl.
drafted. Yeah, Bryce Huff didn't play at all, and obviously neither did James Bradbury. I think, just to quickly touch on the upcoming free agents, I think Kenny Gainwell is very expendable. I really like Will Shipley. I think we can cut loose Kenny Gainwell and let Will Shipley take over that role
I
next
think that's one
season.
thing that they won't do either. Thinking about the way, like when I was thinking about the way the roster can be constructed, I don't think there's any chance they spend money on like a veteran running back in free agency. I think they would bring in another running back. Maybe they even do it high, just
Well,
like
it's Will
someone that's
Shipley's time. You know what I'm saying? It's Will
no,
Shipley's
I think
time.
Will Shipley's good, but I mean the way that Saquon, like if Saquon goes down, Will Shipley's not going to be able to carry a Saquon load all by himself in a
Well,
predominantly
you
running
weren't going
offense.
to be able to expect that from Kenny Gainwell either. So listen, I
No, I'm
I
just saying in general, it
I
has
want
nothing
to
to
just
do with
let it
Kenny Gainwell.
ride with Will Shipley as the second running back. But listen, the biggest priority, screw everything else. The biggest priority, you have to bring back Zach Bond. No ifs, ands, or buts. You have to keep his ass on this team. Do it. And listen, I don't want to lose Sweat or Milton Williams, right? But do whatever you want with them, as just keep Zach Bond a Philadelphia Eagle.
I
That is the
agree, but
biggest
I feel like
priority.
you personally don't put enough emphasis on the impact that Mekhi Becton made and how
I
impactful
listen.
Mekhi
I
Becton was.
love Mekhi Becton. He did great, but when you have a guy you spent a second round draft pick on, who has done very well when when his name has been called, in Tyler Steen, it just makes more sense to pay like Bourne and Milton Williams or Bourne and Josh Sweat instead of Bourne and Mekhi Becton. I love what Mekhi Becton did here. Don't get me wrong. He was phenomenal. And I was really happy for him to see him celebrate with his daughter in the confetti. I thought that was awesome. But when you're talking about, logistics here, I think if you have a very capable backup to him, and there's only so many guys you can keep around, I think it's more important to keep those other guys around.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think they have more resources at the offensive line, but I just don't take it lightly the impact that Mekhi Becton. He's not just a replaceable player. You're not going to find a 6'8", 370-pound guy that just mauls guys at the second level and is a part of one of the offensive lines. He had a couple injuries this year, but the consistency of this offensive line being one of the 7 teams ever to rush for 3,000 yards and have the success that they had, he was a part of that the whole
Yeah,
season. So
absolutely.
and he had a huge and like the thing is he seems like a guy that might be willing to take a pay cut. I mean, Josh Sweat too was willing to take a pay cut. He said money matters, but isn't the only thing that matters when he was asked about it specifically. This was also in the exact same quote that the I should have been MVP quote came from. This was in the exact conversation that he was having. He said money matters, but he's happy right now. He took a pay cut and a contract restructure to just stay on this team when they were gutting the edge rushers with not paying Hassan and then him. So maybe a couple of these guys take pay cuts to remain here. It seems like nobody's like really a selfish guy. I feel like Milton Williams might be the most guy inclined to leave out of everybody, just based like he just might be out of the range and like he's a great
I think
story
I
for the
would rather
Philadelphia.
keep. I think I would rather keep him than Sweat, to be honest.
Yeah, but the
Which
thing
to me
was,
is a
Milton
tough
Williams.
decision because they're both terrific. But I mean, I really like what I saw out of Jalix Hunt. You know,
Oh, so did I. But I also think Jordan Davis is becoming like a pretty decent pass rusher too. I mean, he's getting 14 snaps and had
yeah,
another
yeah,
sack
no,
in the
he
Super
he
Bowl.
has, but I mean, Milton Williams is just so freaking good, man. I think he's so underrated. I think I
I
would
just think
rather
he's
keep
just
him than
he I think
Sweat.
he just played himself out of Philadelphia with how well he played. I just think that's just it is what it is. I think it's going to be tough if they lose both of them, but I mean that's 20 plus million a year. They weren't willing to pay that to Hassan Reddick
Yeah,
coming off like a
I
19
think I
sack
think if
season.
you
So
get rid of the Huff contract and you get rid of the Bradbury contract, if you're able to keep Bond and either Sweat or Milton Williams, then you're good to go. You're good to freaking go. If you're able to pull that off, just keep
well
Bond or
that leads
one of
us
those
into
guys. You're good to go.
That leads us into two other opportunities, and then let's get back to like actually talking about because I have a couple more topics before we get out of here. But since we're talking about it now, if they do lose edge rushers, or depending on how it plays out, they're going to lose one of them most likely, possibly two. one, do you entertain a mega Myles Garrett trade who just asked for a trade?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's Myles
I
Garrett.
don't think it's worth it,
It's
honestly.
Myles Garrett. Listen,
I
it's
think he's
Myles Garrett. It's
I think
Myles
he's
Garrett.
amazing. Yeah, but Myles Garrett is almost like sends a plane ticket for Zach Bond to be out of Philadelphia, in my opinion.
No, well, I mean, I would only make the trade for Garrett if you can also keep Bond. But if you're able to, look,
And a part of
Myles Garrett
those
makes
mega
about the
trades.
same amount you would expect Sweat to get paid. You know,
Well,
I
I
think
think
they could
a
definitely
part of
do
those
both.
mega trades, they also might ask for a position player back, so
Yeah,
that
give him
would
Bryce Huff.
money.
Give him Bryce Huff. Give
They're
him
not going to
Huffy.
take. I mean,
Give
come
him
on,
Huffy.
yeah, like
I
they
don't
would
know,
do that.
maybe
So,
Huff and like Keeley Ringo if I'm thinking about a guy who has actual
brother,
value but
why would
is
the Browns
expendable.
take on a Bryce Huff contract? Why would they do that?
Because Howie Roseman tells them to. That's why. It's freaking Howie, man. He
Their
produces.
GM isn't their GM Andrew Berry? Who's like the old he used to work for the Eagles, so
He's
I
not
don't think
Howie Roseman.
they're too inclined to doing that. That's not the only path to a star pass rusher. One of the most interesting things, I've never seen this from a player, even with how hard of a diehard fan they are. I've never seen a player promote his love for a team while being 2 months away from being drafted.
He was wearing a Let's Hunt hoodie while holding up the Lombardi.
I've never seen a player act the way that Abdul Carter is acting right now towards the Philadelphia Eagles.
It's
I get that he went to Penn
hysterical.
State. He's got a Let's Hunt with his name and number from Penn State already on the thing. He's getting rumored to possibly go number 1 overall in the draft. He was playing with a shoulder injury in the playoffs, and he was still effective versus Notre Dame. He's like, looks like he could be Micah Parsons 2.0, but might even be more polished of a pass rusher, just having actually played as edge rusher entirely throughout his career with Penn State. He's somebody that I would honestly, it might be a similar path line to a top 5 pick to try and get him that it is to Myles Garrett. He doesn't have the exact resume, and it's still a risk with Abdul Carter. Like, he's going to have a career. Myles Garrett's a Hall of Famer, Defensive Player of the Year former, but that might be a more interesting path line to have to even build on this young defense. Could you imagine getting a guy like Abdul Carter at his age and add it to this defense?
I think, first of all, the idea of the Eagles getting Abdul Carter in the draft just seems so unrealistic. It doesn't seem like there's any possible way they could make that happen. But what I do feel like is whoever does draft him, I mean, if you're a team and you draft Abdul Carter, you're basically just a placeholder for 4 years until he leaves and comes to Philly. That's like how it feels with him. Like, he seems like he wants to be an Eagle that bad.
Well, this is how he's feeling
That
right now.
whoever
A lot of
drafts him,
people,
he's just gone there for 4 years and then he's coming to Philly
this
afterwards.
is how he feels now. A lot of people, that kind of wears off a little bit when they actually get into the league. So maybe that will change a little bit when he gets into the league. And, because a lot of guys grew up fans of teams. And then, Dallas Goedert's literally Dallas Goedert, named after the Dallas Cowboys. And then look at the career that he's put together in Philadelphia and just how classic that situation is. And Dallas, the Eagles actually even traded up in front of Dallas to keep him. Or to get him in the draft, so that's even
Well,
funnier. But
Dallas
yeah,
finally won a Super Bowl in the 2000s.
yeah, I think I saw somebody say that. That was hilarious when I
He
saw that.
did. He said that. He's the one who said that. It
Now,
was
my two
Dallas
favorite things to
himself.
clown Cowboys fans that I just say on repeat now is we had more rushing touchdowns in the NFC Championship than you guys had all season, and Tress Way has more NFC Championship passing yards in the 2000s than Cowboys
Kenny
quarterbacks.
Pickett has more pass attempts in the Super Bowl.
I saw Kenny
And
Pickett. Kenny Pickett has more rings than
Jalen
a
Hurts
bunch of.
has as many Super Bowl appearances as Dak Prescott has playoff wins.
That was just another thing. It wasn't weird, but it's Howie just, they said that I haven't heard the quarterback factory comment from Howie since Jalen Hurts has been on the role that he's on. In my personal opinion, Jalen Hurts has now become the best quarterback in franchise history, and Nick Sirianni is the best quarterback or best
Absolutely.
coach in franchise history as
Absolutely.
well. But how he even made that little move just to secure the roster. He secured the roster with Jahan Dotson, who had a big catch in the Super Bowl, just to make sure. And it was just all the little depth things that they did. Jalix Hunt, just to have an extra pass rusher on his thing. And even Jalix Hunt, I was thinking about how interesting it is. Like, for some reason, I was thinking about all the off-ball linebackers that they lost, like could potentially lose if they lose Bond. Jalix Hunt was a safety in college when he first started, and now is an edge rusher. Imagine if they turned Jalix Hunt to an off-ball linebacker and had the same like replicated success that they did with Zach Bond just out of nowhere. That just was a random thought that could be. Nolan Smith even played off-ball as well, so he was playing off-ball linebacker at Georgia a little bit too. So they just have versatile, really good players. But yeah, I thought the Abdul Carter thing was very interesting. But what do you think about I think Kellen Moore, I just felt like it wasn't as impactful, and I didn't feel like it would be a huge loss to the Eagles if he left. And then the last 2 games of the season just almost completely changed my mind with them dropping 55 points and then 40 points and just like whipping out all these plays and just being aggressive. Nick Sirianni, even in the mic'd up after what was it after? It was the strip sack, the Milton Williams strip sack. He tells Nick Sirianni tells Kellen Moore to put the dagger to go after the dagger, and that's the Devontae Smith 46-yard touchdown pass. And Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith had a really cool moment on the sidelines where Smitty's getting emotional in his hometown, winning the Super Bowl, and Jalen's just telling him that he deserves it and that they'll be back and they're just going to build off it. So that was really cool. But I feel like at the end of the season, Kellen Moore just when the stage, it was almost like Kellen Moore and Jalen together. Like they followed the path, they followed what they needed to do to get to that point. And then when Jalen Hurts and Kellen Moore had to take that next step in the playoffs and prove themselves on the biggest stage, they just did it. So now that Kellen Moore takes the Saints job, he's actually going to take the Saints job, got introduced today, but is going back to Philly for the parade. So I thought he'd be fully locked in on the Saints job and working on that, but he's going back for the parade. So that's actually really cool of him. But there's also rumors that with taking the Saints job, Kevin Patullo, the pass game coordinator since Nick Sirianni has gotten there, could potentially leave, and Doug Nussmeier, the quarterback's coach, could also leave with him. So what do
Yeah,
you think of
I don't want them to promote from within. You know, they tried
Yeah, I
that
never think that's
before.
really the smartest thing. I thought the Cowboys were really stupid for doing that with Schottenheimer, but
Yeah, I listen, the one guy I think we all want the most is Frank Reich. And you know, not only do I want him for the obvious reasons, but you know, it could end up being another situation like with Vic Fangio, where it's a guy who's been around for a long time. He's tried being a head coach. It hasn't worked. So if he comes here and becomes offensive coordinator, you know, he can be a guy who ends up sticking around for a long time. And Jalen Hurts can finally get some continuity with his offensive coordinator and not have to worry about learning a new system every year. That's easily the first guy I want. The second
but
guy,
with that being said, though, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they should go outside of the organization. But the fact is, this is going to be the third coach that's taking a head coaching job based off the Nick Sirianni tree. So I feel like that's an appeal to the job itself, is the potential of getting hired as a head coach, just how good this roster is. You're the team success is going to lead to personal success for the coaches and themselves. So I think that might be an inclined reason that a candidate might be more interested in this job, and just all the pieces that you have to work with. You have the best offense in the league on paper to work with, and then you're always backed by having a really good defense and maybe being able to take more risks with having that really good defense. But I feel like candidates looking at this job from outside the organization could see this as a path to them getting head coaching jobs. So I don't know if there's ever going to be continuity with Jalen Hurts just based off of what Nick Sirianni's coaching tree is producing right now. But maybe they could get lucky. I mean, if the Colts keep going down that path, Shane Steichen could be fired, and I could see him easily getting back to Philadelphia in the next couple of years. But we could see a coach get hired as the offense coordinator this offseason and leave after
well,
next year, depending on the
not to interrupt, but I did want to get to the other offensive coordinator I would like to see come here, if not Frank Reich, and that would be Josh McCown. To me,
Yeah, that's a
Josh
big rumor
McCown, my
too. Yeah.
second. Yeah, that's easily my second choice is McCown.
You think they should bring in the guy that made them pretty much take Jalen Hurts? I feel like the Josh McCown playoff game versus Seattle is like the sole reason Jalen Hurts got drafted, because
I
like
could
you
see
see
that.
all the you it was like the brink of like it was like the boiling point of like that whole situation. 9 plays into a playoff game and Jalen Hurts gets knocked out, and we have a 40-year-old quarterback that tears both hamstrings in the game and still plays throughout it. And that was the only resource at the quarterback position that we had. And I feel like that stems a lot from the Howie quarterback factory comments, is them getting put in that position as having a home playoff game and having to start a 40-year-old quarterback out of retirement 90 plays into the game. I feel like that was one of the biggest reasons why Jalen Hurts was even on the roster. So that would be a full circle moment.
Yeah, and one final thing I want to talk about from this game, because I actually forgot all about it, but then I do need to get out of here. When I was watching the game with my cousin, he brought up a great point. Actually, he brought it up after the game. He said he was glad that Super Bowl 51 happened, that comeback by Tom Brady, because if not for that, that's what made the second half still interesting. And I feel the exact same way. You know what I mean? If that comeback never happened in the Super Bowl, going into halftime, the vibe might have been, this is over. We're about to win the Super Bowl. But because we've seen Brady come back from a 25-point deficit, it was kind of like, let's not get too excited. Crazier things have happened. And so it kind of made at least the third quarter interesting. The fourth quarter, you knew it was over by then, but it at least made the third quarter still interesting.
For sure, for sure. Jalen Hurts, a couple interesting stats from the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts, 2 highest rushing games by a quarterback in Super Bowl history. Jake Elliott had the most points accounted for by a kicker in a Super Bowl. At one point in the game, the Chiefs were 0 for 8 on third down and hadn't passed midfield late into the third quarter. The Eagles also set the record for most turnovers in a postseason. The Eagles obviously set the franchise record for most wins in a season as well in totality with the 18 wins. They went, Jalen Hurts went 14-0 to end the season. So I thought that was interesting. When we were talking about Jake Elliott earlier, Bo Allen actually said that Jake Elliott on the Chris Long podcast, that Jake Elliott was dealing with an injury throughout the season that wasn't disclosed, but Jake Elliott kind of shut that down earlier today, right before we actually hopped on the podcast, and said that everybody's dealing with stuff. So that was not that big of a deal to him. Another thing that I saw online that I thought was funny, Nick Wright, your boy, was telling a story about how he got called out by Jalen Hurts' mom at a Clutch Sports party before the Super Bowl.
That. Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty funny as well. And Jordan Mailata, when he was getting interviewed, he hops on WIP's afternoon show like 4 o'clock on Tuesdays, and he got asked about Kellen Moore, and he was saying Kellen Moore was actually a genius, and he was mentioning reasons why Kellen Moore was successful, and he was saying that a big reason why Kellen Moore was successful is because he listens to the feedback of the players and actually was listening suggestions. And if you listen to the mic'd up, people are asking, what does Nick Sirianni do? You could hear at times in the game, Nick Sirianni is not calling actual plays, but he's giving suggestions of play types that he wants to see. He tells Kellen Moore to calls for the dagger, which is the AJ or the Devontae 46-yard touchdown. There's another point in the game where he just wants to keep the offense consistent in the third quarter and just keep the clock moving. So he asks for a downhill run, and there's just different plays like that. So it's not only Kellen Moore was taking suggestions when the offensive line went to him earlier in the season and said they wanted to run the ball more, but he's also taking suggestions from the head coach and Nick Sirianni as well. So he had an impact like that. So that's a really good way to coach, and that might actually show that he could have success somewhere else because he's not stubborn in his own ways. And a coach that's like, it's not as comparable being a defensive coach, but like a stubborn coach like Bill Belichick that's only going to look at his ways. He's always looking to invent things. Before we get out of here, let's just talk about the last thing. What do you think are 5 things that you would boil down to remembering the most about this season?
I guess off the top of my head, to answer that question, I would say the performance from Saquon. I would say the hate towards the Philadelphia Eagles. I would say the breakout performances from guys like Zach Bond and even Oren Burks and Mekhi Becton. Man, it's kind of a tough question. I guess I would say, getting off to a slow start and then really bouncing back strong is a huge aspect of the season. And I would say, the Eagles forming a very strong brotherhood is a big aspect of this season as well. I also think that played a huge factor in the game. And I forget who mentioned it in the mic'd up, but they said, I think what we have here is a lot stronger than what they have over there. And it was spot on. I mean, this team is just an absolute brotherhood now, led by Jalen Hurts. It was such a phenomenal leader. And actually, one thing I did want to mention, Chris Long said on his podcast that I don't know if you saw the clip, but he said he was in the locker room after the NFC Championship game. Everybody was celebrating. They just looked like such a confident team. And then Jalen Hurts walked in super casually, like he had just won a preseason game. Chris Long shaked his hand and it said, "Go and finish this now." And Jalen Hurts said, "It's already been written," which is just, I mean, like, come on, that's just it's insane stuff. But it shows you the kind of mindset Jalen Hurts has and just how much of a winner he is.
Yeah, for me, I think the five things that I'll remember, one of them, one of the biggest ones I'll remember is kind of like the early season Nick Sirianni woes that we're going through. He had what people were calling was a meltdown. He was, chirping the fans in the crowd. Infamously, a couple years back, he did that with the Chiefs fans as well. So it came full circle that he ended up getting to beat them in a Super Bowl. Shaves his head. The team's 2-2. It looks like it's going to be a very similar team to 2023, even though they've changed a lot of different players and pieces, and just the way they were able to overcome it. Also, with Nick Sirianni being involved in this thing that I remember is just the overall doubted the way that Nick Sirianni specifically and Jalen Hurts were doubted throughout the entire season until they got to the Super Bowl and ended up putting on that performance, in the way that they're still even doubted, with guys writing articles about them possibly, like Nick Sirianni being fired after the first playoff game with all the success, even not knowing if Nick Sirianni would be back next offseason or last offseason before the season started. So just the way that Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts specifically persevered. I would also remember the way that how quick the defense just got turned around, and they just made changes to the defense and what they were able to do and turn this defense around that quickly from a team that they built a Super Bowl roster and they let go of arguably their best defensive player and they lost two Hall of Famers, and the way that they were able to just turn around that quickly with having lost that talent and that stability that they had in Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey for that many years, just being able to turn around and have the leaders to make it happen, and even bring back a guy like CJ Gardner-Johnson who wasn't there before. I also will think about how Saquon Barkley himself, like, pretty much re-brought back the running back value, because you got to think of Saquon Barkley is like the number one guy that holds the value to running backs, because he was the highest drafted running back in like the 2000s era. You know what I mean? So like the weight that's on his shoulders is even more than like a Christian McCaffrey who went 8th overall, or Leonard Fournette 4th overall, or Zeke back in the day. And all those guys, there was talented running backs, but like Zeke was this, or Saquon was the 2nd overall pick in the draft. So everybody's saying, oh, $12 million to a running back's not worth it. He's injury prone. Paying running backs just isn't worth it in general. And it just really revamped the position. And even with guys with, I would say, up there with Saquon in the importance of running backs recently is Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson being high draft picks. And even Jahmyr Gibbs, like, why are the Lions taking a running back at pick 12? And you saw the impact that he made. So just for Saquon, almost like single-handedly revamping the running back position and just changing that entire market, and the impact that he made of just bringing back old style football to where the Eagles won the Super Bowl on the backbone of a great defense and a running game. And being able to fill in the blanks with the passing game on offense. So that's something that I'll remember. And I'll remember just the feeling of this could potentially start, this season could be the start of, something extremely special in the time period of the Eagles' history, because of how good and young this team is. And like I said, this feels different from the Super Bowl 52 victory, because in 52, I didn't know if there was a path to getting back to the Super Bowl, and I just didn't see it on the roster. And it wasn't even a thought that crossed my mind after the game. I was just so happy in that initial moment, but now it's just like the hunger, and that's why I see what AJ Brown was saying in that post, because it's just the hunger to get back to more, because this team still has a lot more to prove, because I feel like they're on the brink of actually doing something extremely
Yeah.
special.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts, you can tell he's still not satisfied yet. He wants more. I think he'll get more. He's a very determined guy. The whole team is very determined. It's a very young team at that as well. I don't think this team is finished. My one closing remark, with that Super Bowl win, that makes the Eagles one of the most successful franchises of this century. I would put obviously the Patriots and Chiefs ahead of them in terms of success in the 21st century. You could maybe make an argument for the Steelers, but outside of that, I wouldn't put anyone else ahead of the Eagles for
Oh,
this century.
the Eagles are the best team in the 2000s of the NFC, and it's not even close. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like the Giants have
absolutely.
2 Super
I
Bowls.
mean,
Well,
they've had what, 8 NFC title appearances, 4
well,
Super Bowl
that was one of my
appearances, 2
initial
Super
thoughts.
Bowl trophies, multiple seasons with 13 plus wins.
Well,
I
how
mean,
many? I was thinking about like the class that the Eagles put themselves in, winning multiple Super Bowls. So multiple Super Bowls won. The Patriots have done it. They won like what, 6? The Chiefs have won 3. The Rams have won 2. The Ravens have won 2 since 2000. The Rams have won 2. The Ravens have won 2. The
well,
Bucks
yeah,
have won
since
2.
2000, only 2 teams have had more than 2 Super Bowl victories, and that's the Chiefs and the
Yeah.
Patriots, right? There's a lot of teams with 2, but when you compare the Eagles to those other teams, that being the Steelers, the Giants, um, uh, I forget who else, but those are the 2 main ones that I think of. There was one other
The Steelers, Giants, Rams, Ravens, Bucks.
Rams, Ravens, Bucks. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. And when you compare them to those other teams, the Giants, I mean, outside those 2 rings, they've been horrible.
Yeah.
The Steelers, they've been mediocre for many
Well, if
years.
you look at the NFC over the past couple
The
of years in the
Ra-
NFC,
the Rams had a stretch where they were bad. The Buccaneers had a long
the
stretch
only
of being
teams that have
awful.
like come out of the NFC recently have been what? The Rams have done it like twice since the Eagles won the Super Bowl. The Eagles have done it 3 times. Um, the Bucks did it.
49ers did it twice.
Yeah, the 49ers did it twice. It's been like as much success as like Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady have had, and just transitioning from like Tom Brady in the AFC moving over to the NFC, and then Patrick Mahomes dominating the AFC as much as he has. It's really been the same teams in the NFC too that have just been taking turns at the top too. That's also been the
Yeah,
case.
but and the Eagles have been consistently great throughout this century. Like the only I can only think of one time where they were bad for 2 years in a row, and that's 2011 and 2012. And even in 2011, they went 500. They went 8-8. Um, they had back-to-back 7-9 seasons in 2015 and 2016, but even that's not that crazy. And then that was followed up with a Super Bowl victory. Like they never really went through a stretch of time of being a bad team like these other teams with 2 Super Bowl rings this
They
century.
don't sit on their hands though. That's why all this happens. This success is because they don't sit on their hands. They spend the money. They don't just let like money just burn a hole in their pocket. They're willing to go make those moves and be
Yeah.
aggressive. And some of them
And
doesn't
that's
work
glory,
out.
man.
They
That's
quit.
what happens when you have an owner who truly cares about the team.
Oh, 100%. And, it's, that's just like makes the fans more inclined to spend their money on the team and just generate more resources for the team to be good and just more interest to the team. And, the Eagles are really making a name for themselves. And it just feels like this like franchise has really gotten over a huge hump of like just being close to success, but not getting there. And now we're like seen as one of the most successful franchises in recent memory in the NFL. And I didn't really know if we would ever get to this point and like have it like happen this shortly in between of winning one Super Bowl and then getting another one, but it's all great. One of the last things we'll talk about, how long of a contract extension would you give Nick Sirianni?
I'd give him another 4 years at least.
4 would be your minimal. Like I think, yeah, I would probably give him 4 to 5 years. Do you give
Yeah.
him more lead way and maybe like looking for an offensive coordinator? Do you let him get more say because they went out and picked these offensive coordinators for him this season? It obviously worked out for the Eagles, but do you think he'll have some say in who he wants to bring in?
I don't really know. You know what I mean? I don't know how much. I don't know. I thought he already did pick his coordinators, honestly, because I thought that's what every coach does. So, hey, whatever. Either or.
Well, that also kind of stemmed from like the Doug era too, when Doug was like anointing guys from within, and then the Eagles kind of shut that down a little bit. And after what happened last season, so the Eagles front office kind of steps in at times and kind of leads it into the right direction. But I'm really happy with this team. It was a great season. It was, it's crazy that it's over. We're gonna have to wait 7 months for football to come back on. We're gonna have a lot of time to celebrate. We're gonna have some Phillies baseball coming up soon. So they ripped our heart out last year, but the Eagles ended up saving us. So it feels like I'll be so long ago from the Phillies just collapsing to the Mets in the playoffs, and I didn't want to end the podcast on a negative note, but I just wanted to talk about how we had that 2022 year where everything went wrong in Philadelphia sports with like we were so close to it being such a crazy year for Philadelphia sports, and just went everything wrong. And then even last year before this NFL season started, it seemed like the Knicks were going to have we were going to be the laughing stock to like New York sports for a really long time with the way the Knicks beat us in the playoffs and just like everything that was surrounding that. And it just felt like we were like kind of like becoming a laughing stock, just like with the Sixers and everything. And then we just completely shut that down with the whole Saquon situation. So I thought that was funny because like New York sports fans were drilling Philadelphia sports fans for a minute, and then all that just got completely shut up once the NFL season started with Saquon and
Yeah.
everything. So
Yeah, he really saved our asses there. And the New York has gone back to being the butt of the joke, which is great. Also, having to cut ties with Daniel Jones midway through the season, equally hilarious. But yeah.
So what's the last comment for the Eagles season after becoming Super Bowl 59 champions? What's the last thing you'll leave on this podcast as we end the celebratory Super Bowl 59 victory celebration on episode 85 of the Paisan Sports podcast? This is a special episode. You got to
Go
think
Birds.
of all the podcasts that we may do in the future and that we've done so far. 85 podcasts it has taken for us to talk about and celebrate a Philadelphia sports championship.
Well, that's the thing too, is that was actually one other reason I forgot to mention why this Super Bowl victory felt so great is because oh no, I did mention that. Yeah, in 2022 we had like 3 different teams in the mix, and for not a single one of them to win it all, to be able to get back 2 years later and actually bring home a trophy just feels absolutely amazing. But my closing remark is go Birds.
Go Birds. Eagles. Eagles. What's
Go
up with
Birds.
that should have been your meatball of the week as a whole, is just like all the Eagles fans that are embarrassing us with from the mayor to all different types of fans that try and do Eagles chants and just can't spell it correctly.
Well, no, the people who spell it incorrectly are just mocking the mayor. They're not doing that.
Someone did it. Someone did it on the Super Bowl at the Super Bowl in New Orleans on the pregame show, like horrifically with a straight face. Like it was not in a joking manner
I
whatsoever.
think they're mocking the mayor.
He said EAGEL and then didn't even add an S at the end. Eagles.
Oh no.
I also think the rendition of the fight song also gets misinterpreted a lot of times in that. But my closing remark on this season is it was a great season. I'm really excited that this happened, but I'm also eager for the future and to see what this team
Oh,
could develop
I
into.
can't wait till next season already.
I mean, Cooper DeJean, that pick six, you got to think the dude is turning 22 on that day that he intercepts that ball and brings it to the crib. So, if the Eagles, if the Eagles can improve the roster in any way, just with like the thoughts of the free agents that they have and just maybe a position that might have been lacking compared to the rest of the roster, what do you think they would target?
I'm sorry. Repeat the question.
The last thing was if which position do you think the Eagles would target to bring in a player, just based off of like maybe potential free agents that they could potentially lose, or just based off a position that might just could be upgraded in general?
I think you need
Because
to
that's
bring
also
in
going to be a tough thing to
I think you
swallow.
need
Is
to
there might be
bring
a
in
guy on this
Lane's
roster that was a
replacement. I think you need to bring in Lane's replacement. You could bring in a slot receiver or just add to the pass rush.
well, I think Jahan Dotson, he's somebody that they're going to try and get the most out of just based off of them spending
Yeah,
a
but
high
that's
grade
not really
on him.
working out. I mean, listen, he did great in the Super Bowl, but it hasn't really been working out. I would like to either bring a slot receiver, Lane's replacement, add to the pass rush, or also maybe even Slay's replacement. Although I do like either Isaiah Rodgers or Akile Ringo.
Yeah, I would love for Slay to come back and run it back for one more year as well. And then you have the luxury of if Slay gets hurt, like how frequently he got hurt this year, even though it's just like miss the rest of the game and come back the next week. But you would have the luxury of like if you still having Keelan Ring on the roster, and then maybe if you bring back Isaiah Rodgers, the insurance of those guys, if you did bring back Slay to fall back on in that case. But there also could be like a tough decision to where like, oh, well, this position could be upgraded with the starter from the Super Bowl that played pretty well, but we have this avenue to get this player at this position with a draft resource or as a free agent and upgrade the position. So that could also happen as well. But I do think they'll look at the route of bringing in possible replacements of like guys that are getting older. But there's only one guy that they really have to look out for. They're going to have to replace the pass rushing rotation just in general, but just one guy actually getting replaced as a starter would be Lane Johnson based off of age, but he still has a year or two left to go. But just as a future thing that they could do, maybe a Cam Jurgens type thing with Jason Kelsey. So.
Yeah,
But
that's what I expect them to do
that
is,
guy could also be Mekhi
Lane,
Becton
he
too if they get him
retires
back
to
from a free agent
replace him, get a
contract.
replacement now.
Yeah, but thank you guys for tuning in to episode 85 of the Paisan Sports podcast, celebrating the Eagles' Super Bowl 59 victory. Talk strictly Eagles on this podcast, but next week we're gonna have to ramp up some Phillies baseball talk with pitchers and catchers reporting, and the season being like a month away. Not too much to talk about with the Sixers losing 7 of 8. Paul George coming off one of the worst performances of his career, and things just not looking good for Philadelphia. One thing real quickly about the Sixers, Justin Edwards, I don't know if you watched the Sixers recently, but Justin Edwards has been a really bright spot for him. Former 5-star recruit coming out of college, went to Kentucky, and then just kind of just didn't pan out, and the Sixers got him for really cheap, and they actually moved him from a two-way contract to an actual NBA contract. And he's 19 years old, and he's had a couple big games for them. Lefty, small forward, so that's why I'm excited because he's a small forward. So just another piece that they added on the low. But yeah, so next week we'll be back with more overall Philadelphia sports content, but. Hopefully tomorrow, when everybody goes to the parade, if you're making it down to the parade in Philadelphia, everyone stays safe. And just enjoys and celebrates this team one last time. Everybody will be celebrating. I think when the Phillies start at Citizens Bank Park, there'll be "Go Birds" and EAGLES chants all over the place. So it's never going to end. But tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of people there. So please stay safe out there. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll sign off and see you next week.
Go Birds.